After a bit of a winter break, we're back with the new stack agents. Our new season starts today, and our guest today is I always want to say Paul Matan instead of Matan-Paul Shetrit from Writer, who leads product over there. Matan-Paul, thanks for being here.
Pleasure to be here. Nice to meet you, Frederic, and I'm excited for our talk.
Absolutely. Yeah, I followed Writer for a while, and I've met with some of your colleagues over the years, but never like really in a formal way. So I thought maybe a lot of people might be like me. They saw Writer in the early days, and it's obviously evolved since then and evolved quite a bit. So maybe talk to me a little bit about what that evolution was like. And as a caveat, you've been there for 2 years. The company is a little bit older, but I'm sure you're quite aware of where it came from.
Yeah, for sure. So, the story of Writer is the story of, I guess, AI. And we have evolved the same way as the underlying technology and offering has evolved. Me and Wasim, our co-founders, basically started Writer about 5 years ago, close to six almost. And at the time, they've also um, um, built essentially our LLMs from the ground up together with ChatGPT at the same time, ChatGPT 2.0 and the original Transformer article came about. Since then, we've been building models on an ongoing basis and building capabilities. Unlike some of the, let's call it, other offerings in the market, we did not start as a research lab, turned consumer, dabble into enterprise from day one. Our goal and focus was to bring AI and its capabilities to the enterprise world. As I'm sure you know, when you build for companies, for enterprises, there are certain things that are outside of your core product and offering that are as important, if not more. So things like data retention, single tenant versus multi-tenant deployment, security, how you train your model, what data goes into the model, et cetera, et cetera. And these are all the things that we've built from day one as core primitive for the platform and the product that allowed us to expand in the enterprise. We've also correctly identified that we have evolved. I think Writer historically in the early days was mostly connected to the marketing space.
Sure.
Also,
Hence the name, right?
Sorry?
Hence the name at the
Yeah.
time, right?
Also suggest the name writing. I think where I would like challenge that even around the name is our specialization, I would say, and where we really spike on is, let's call it the written word. Now, the written word could be a lot of things. It could be marketing, it could be in sales, it could be in code. Code is also written. So when
Sure.
we say content in the context of Writer, that has evolved from just like, let's say, an ad copy to anything and everything that is the written word.
Mhm.
Um, and we've expanded our business in the Global 2000 and the Fortune 500 to capture more and more of these use cases across engineering, product, marketing, sales, customer support. But all of these use cases are for internal purposes. We are very rarely customer facing. We tackle the gnarliest, hairiest problems within these organizations, which are usually how do you take existing operational workflows that they have and basically bring them to the age of AI, and help these businesses kind of like unlock their potential and continue the growth that they've been showing for
Right.
for hundreds of years.
And the age of AI and now also the age of agents, right? Because, at least over the last year or so, you've also built out this agent orchestration layer and kind of tooling both for developers and maybe non-developers as well to
Yeah.
build these agents, right, and workflows.
Yeah, so I think during this call, and I apologize in advance, and this is an industry-wide problem, definitions of names is a bit vague. I would probably use the term LLM agents and AI interchangeably. But similar to how we've evolved, also the technology has evolved. So if you think of LLMs is the entry point, let's say, when the hype started. They were very sensitive to prompting, very rigid, and then the next generation would be what we called custom apps or custom, and eventually custom agents when the marketing language started landing, which is prompt chaining, model selection that can be a little bit more rigid and deterministic. And yes, we are now, I would say, in the phase 3 of the industry, which is agentic systems. And these are where we start delivering on the great promise, or more delivering on that great promise of AI, which is more autonomous, skill-based, can invoke and make quote unquote decisions and rationalize these decisions to invoke other agents or other tools to take actions in your system internally or externally. Writer agent, which is our latest, I would say, iteration of our product, or Writer as a whole as it is now, is literally that. It's like an agentic system built on our models and our capabilities to support the enterprises.
And I just want to take one step back there, because I think it's fascinating that you're still building your own models, right? The Primera series of models. Has that been something you've questioned over the years now, with kind of the off-the-shelf models getting a lot better at a lot more tasks and tool calling and agentic use cases?
Yeah, our job is, I would call it EPD, engineering product design leaders, or leaders in general, is to question everything we do on a regular basis. And specifically on the model, we question it constantly. Historically, the reason we built our own models, or the original reasons we started building our own models, is because there wasn't an alternative. Specifically, my ability to go to a Fortune 500 company and tell them, yes, this is not trained on IP protected data, was zero. I could not guarantee that. As an example, my ability to control the model companies from changing the model under us by quantitizing or distilling models was zero. So when you start when you start engaging in business critical use cases, that's a no-go. The joke I always say is that a lot of these model labs, they're selling you a Porsche, and you drive a Porsche for a few weeks when the model is fresh. But then at some point during the night, someone comes in and switches your model from a Porsche model to a Kia. Now the car still drives, and it's beautiful inside, but it's no longer a Porsche.
Yeah.
And I think what happens with a lot of these labs is their models and capabilities are amazing, but for them to reduce their cost and show economics that make sense, they basically look at inputs and outputs of the model over time, let's say 2, 3, 4 weeks after the model goes live, and then they de facto change the model to fit for those needs. In any other world in software, this would call a breaking change on the API layer. But for some reason, this is acceptable in the world we live in. Another example is we saw this with GPT-5 going to market, that within a day the O series just disappeared, or Gemini killing models left and right with zero warning. So and that's just not something that enterprises can afford. These models they're not interchangeable, and easily you can swap them out if we don't control the model layer. So there's a bunch of these reasons that pushed us to this direction. That being said, we're also practical. Our CEO, May, was part of the AWS reInvent keynote with Matt Gurman.
Yep, I was there.
And there we announced that Writer is opening its platform to support any and all models that are on Bedrock. Because we perceive also Bedrock as a secure enterprise-grade model provider that we want to work with, and there's more coming in that realm in the coming, let's say, weeks and months as we expand that offering.
Sure. For your own models, one thing I've written about a lot lately is kind of open weight, open source, still a discussion what to call it really, but those open models. Do you use any of those as a foundation at this point, or are you still building from scratch?
It really depends on the use case. Palmyra historically has been built from scratch. Now, it's also important to understand that Palmyra is the LLMs that customers have access to, but there's other areas in the product that have de facto AI that is not as visible. So, for example, when you use our RAG system and we do extraction as well as semantic relationship building in our knowledge graph, that's a small language model that we've built or fine-tuned. So at the end of the day, though, I think as we in the current architecture, we can talk about our kind of like strategic view of where LLMs are going. But in the current architecture of models, the definition or the line between have you actually written the code from scratch in your repo, or have you taken an open source model and completely modified it? To me, that's just like semantics at this point, because you can do a lot with with the post training and RL on an existing platform, while also building existing platform. So that's like, I think there's still and I understand where this is coming from, that like quote unquote tension. But if you think of software as a whole, the open source community is an amazing treasure and a unique treasure as we think about software engineering compared to, let's say, other industries.
Absolutely.
And I think what we're seeing happening now, with, for example, Kimi that just came out, and rumors talk about DeepSeek that is coming out soon, and bunch of other open source, players that are not just giving run for the money for the large labs, but beating them in a lot of cases, is absolutely amazing. And I hope this continues, because I don't think it's the right thing to have all of this like power like locked in within these like 2-3 companies around the world.
For sure. Would you make your own models open at some point? Is that a consideration?
We have actually.
Okay.
So some of them are already. So like Palmyra Fin, Palmyra Med are fully open source, and there's more coming in that domain. But we've announced this in Q4. Well, it's not last year anymore. It's the year before last. I guess it's 2024. But we are actually taking a bit of a different tack here when it comes to model building moving forward. This idea, and again, this maybe is more relevant for the enterprise. You can make an argument that it's relevant also for the consumer space. But our view is this idea that models need to be bigger and bigger, cost more and more, is just not feasible and not the right approach. The same way that when I break my arm, I don't go to my dentist. There's like an element of specialization, especially as you think within complex organization like enterprise as a whole, or B2B as businesses as a whole. We've announced our first, publicly, we've announced that about our new view of architecture for the new self-evolving models. We have customers in closed beta on this, and we're looking to start rolling it out more in a more open beta during 2026, because we do believe this is the future of what model architecture needs to look like.
And that's smaller, more nimble, fewer active parameters, I guess, things like that. Is that what you think?
It's smaller, more specialized, learn from usage. And again, going back to the secondary and tertiary components of an enterprise product, there's a lot that comes with it. Things like version control, rollback. How do you make sure that a disgruntled employee didn't just like dump all this nonsense into the model and just made it go off the deep end? How do you control it? How do you observe it? Like the same way that models evolve, your guardrails need to evolve over time. So there's a lot of things that come with it. It's not just a model; it's a suite offering. And we believe this is the future, because if we want to see widespread adoption in businesses and in enterprise, we have to lower the cost of the models. Today, if a model, no agent can run for 24/7 unsupervised. So when they tell you these costs of like the models, it's nonsense. It's nonsensical. Today models are cheaper and they're getting cheaper, but they're still not cheap enough compared to a software developer or other use cases. So and you still need a software developer for a supervision point of view.
Sure.
So our view is to get to a place where AI is completely adopted. In scale, you have to reduce costs, improve accuracy, and increase speed. And to do the cost component, we believe smaller specialized models, essentially think of it as bespoke for your use cases, are a requirement.
Yeah. How bespoke would that get in your view? Would that be a completely customized model using maybe RL afterwards to train it and post-train it, or what would that look like?
Yeah, so I think one of the problems we have in the industry is that the AI shops have really, really smart people. Not me specifically, our engineers, our researchers, and they're conflating the being smart part with assuming other people have a domain and skills that they have. I don't think fine tuning at its current form is the right approach for any company. I think what or RL for that for that matter.
Because
it's
just
too
too
complex.
complex.
It's too hard. If you've ever been in an enterprise company and saw how they store their data, you're like, holy hell, getting this to a format that a model or an agent like a model can be trained on or fine-tuned on. So what we believe that the beauty of self-evolving models is they can run in the background in kind of like shadow mode and essentially observe the inputs and outputs and the interaction, get the feedback, and think of it as continuously evolve and change the weights on the fly continuously. Why this is also interesting is because our approach and our view would be that we don't own these models. They're your models as the user.
Right.
That's not my model. Now, what I give you is all of the components around it that allow you to use these models safely and in scale, but the data is yours, you know. And I think this is really an important and nuanced thing. Like our view in Writer as a whole, the data is yours when it comes to the model layer, when it comes to what became like a massive hype over Christmas, which is the context graph. The context is yours, and all of these things these are decisions that we make on a philosophical fundamental level when we build product. Like it is your data. We give you the tools to manage it and scale and grow it, but it is your data.
Yeah, and you probably don't even see it or touch it at all, right? So
we do not see it or touch it. No.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a requirement. Like to me, we've had customers in the past tell me, hey, like, why don't you guys do these amazingly beautiful white papers like some of the other AI labs about how do enterprises use AI? And I'm like, because you don't want me to look at your data. That's why I don't do this. And I don't look at your data, which also makes my life as a PM and my team really hard because if there's a bug, yes, I get alerted, but to know what actually happened, I need to go to the user and basically like, hey, what did you do here? Like, why can't you debug it? It's like, because I don't have access to your inputs and outputs. I don't know what you've done, and I need to replicate it. And again, this is part of the cost of doing business when you're dealing with these kind of companies. But I also think that's why building agentic and building AI in the enterprise is not just like slap some security on a consumer product. It requires it's a different DNA.
Yeah, and it's a different kind of security as well. It's changed completely. So new tooling for that as well. It's not just network security anymore. That's all just part of it, but you add a layer on top of that now.
Absolutely.
Now, that means you don't have a ton of insight in exactly how your customers are using the platform. That should make your life a lot harder as well, I would think.
The answer is no and yes. Intentionally not yes and no. And so I don't have insights in the sense that I don't go to a dashboard and see like a news feed of all the prompts on a given account. No, I don't have that.
Right.
What I do have, and this was like part of, I would say, the genius of Maine was seen in the early days. They've built, this is not their first rodeo, and they've learned a lot in their previous company, and they've built like a very strong, I would say, let's call it for the purpose of this, a pre and post sales, but a solutioning component to Writer, because what they've seen and they've identified is like with any new technology, or the idea that I can give an enterprise an API and say, peace out, good luck, go figure this out, is not realistic. Also, on top of that, there's a paradigm shift. Like part of our job, still to this day, is to show companies the art of the possible. And what do I mean by that? May has this amazing. I remember this. This is before I joined Writer. Actually, I remember I was in a talk of hers, and she had this like things that stuck with me. And she's like, the best and worst thing that happened to AI is ChatGPT. It's the best because everyone talks about it, so it makes our lives really easy when we come and sell to an executive. It's the worst because everyone thinks that AI is chat.
Yeah.
And this is a problem, and a lot of what we do in our solutions team and our CSMs and our sales team, they sit with an account and they map their needs and they really go deep into understanding what is the transformation they're trying to drive. So yeah, I might not have visibility on the individuals giving a prompt unless they gave me feedback through the product. But where I do have visibility is on like how they're actually using it, what are they doing, what are the use cases, and just like my team and our engineers spend hundreds of calls with the customers hands-on to understand what they're doing, what are the opportunities, how can we unlock. And again, the difference, yes, there's obviously a lot of differences, but like there's a lot of feature set that is required, whether or not you're a CPG, a company, or you are a healthcare, or if you're in FinServ, from like the enterprise component of what it takes and what it needs to manage agentic and scale, versus the individual use case. Hey, we need maybe a model that is better on like, I don't know, understanding prescription or ISO codes or whatever.
Yep. And it's not just, I mean, it's right? It's not just chat, but it's also not just the model itself. You mentioned the context graph, and that is part of it, right? Bringing that data into these systems, no matter how you're doing it, RAG or context windows or some form. But you've talked about that quite a bit, and I wonder how that thinking has evolved for you as well over the last few years, and how to build that context graph and what that looks like today.
Yeah. So, from the early days, we were a full stack system. Control the model layer, the RAG layer, the guardrails, the application, and then the success, the change management success part. What we did find is that our dream from day one, and this is before I joined, and after I joined, I've seen all the old decks, and it has evolved, is how do we take this quote unquote RAG layer and expand it from just PDFs and presentations, and expand it maybe to your org chart, to how decisions are made, to where are the centers of power within the organization for a certain decision, how do you route that. And I think that was always the vision and dream. And funny enough, I've been written about it a little bit in the last 6 to 8 months on that, but all of a sudden, like and we're excited by this, like the Twitterverse or the Xverse kind of converge on that understanding that data is great, but what's actually would drive impact in the enterprise is, we call it the orchestration graph and the judgment graph, but basically, how are decisions being made and how do we orchestrate across the various nodes programmatically or agentically, let's call it, within the organization.
Right.
For me, what was really an eye-opener, and this is before I joined Writer, I was at a company called Brex. And at Brex, I was leading the card and spend team. And we try to build like a new spend management capability. And our first pass was like, great, let's connect to an ATS or to an HR and bring in the org chart.
Hmm.
And then very quickly we understood that the org chart is the starting point, but the way spend management is managed is actually a separate graph that is superimposed on the org chart graph. And what do I mean by that? So, for example, if I now spend, like I report to a co-founder and CTO, but he doesn't actually review my spend,
Right.
even though I report,
Right.
it's our CFO that does. Or depending on the spend amount, there's a completely different, you traverse a completely different part of the graph. So it's like, if you think of a graph, it's almost like the nodes are different colors depending on different sets of rules. And that always to me is something I come back to, which is like, even something as quote unquote simple as like me, me buying a flight or booking a hotel for work is actually quite complex and had a lot of context that is historically was if then or employee handbooks.
Yeah. Or maybe not even
And not even, or
written down.
maybe organizational, like it's some organizational memory or context that is not documented anywhere, which happens a lot. So, for example, if I go and present to our CTO or CEO, there's words today I know I should not use. Not
Right.
because they're right or wrong, because they give them connotation that would take the conversation elsewhere.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think that's not documented anywhere. That's just
Mhm.
like through blood, sweat, and tears of learning of making this mistake a bunch of times. And then
Right.
the question is, how do you bring that context into these models and how do you retain it? Now,
Mhm.
the reason it becomes even more complex and interesting is because the context graph is dynamic. And what do I mean by that? As you bring AI into your organization, AI changes the way your organization works. So as AI
True.
learns
True.
how your organization works, it also influences the organization. So there's this back and forth that is happening between the context graph that kind of like encodes the way your org work and the AI. And the context graph cannot be static. It's a dynamic living being that is evolving and changing constantly. And the rate of change will increase compared to what it is today as AI is more and more embedded, as more and more decisions are made by it, and as the technology becomes faster, cheaper, and better. So it's deployed and scaled in the
Yeah.
organization.
So how do you build that graph, I think is the question then, right? Because there's some is written, unwritten, some is just, inferred from Slack messages and conversations people have in meetings. And what does that look like?
Yeah, so we have there's things I can say and things I can't say yet,
Sure.
but we have one thing is I want to be very clear. We believe that the context layer needs to be model agnostic.
Okay.
It's your context. So whatever model you use, the context layer should stay kind of like independent of the model.
Hmm.
That being said, we also believe that combining context and self-evolving models would create force multipliers to unlock significant more capabilities. So to me, the context layer and the self-evolving are two sides of the same coin, but you can still use one without the other. And I think this
Right.
is really, really important because if you have the need, especially in enterprises, you have the need to use model provider A or B for whatever reasons, whether it's you have commits with them or whatever, you can still do that. Our hypothesis and what we're seeing as we're testing this is you will be able to see great results, but not like as great of results.
Mm.
We have today things that we're doing with, I would call them in some cases alpha, some cases beta, depend on the stage of development. But we've been building this context graph / self-evolving essentially for the last year plus. And we're seeing really promising results, and there's more things to come here in the coming, as I said, weeks and months.
And when you're talking about results, just to put a bit of a context around that as well, like what are we talking about? Just better, better understanding
Better,
of,
faster, cheaper.
okay.
That's what we like.
Yeah.
And again, better is a problematic term because like
Yeah.
no one defines what is. Everyone's like we have a great or better or agentic system, but there's no concept of what better is, which is a separate topic for us to discuss if you want. But we published a white paper recently on our take of what does it take to measure agentic system in a more qualitative way.
I'd be interested in that for sure. Yes.
And we can share that, and you can share that link also with our viewers. But we published it, and we have a view of what it takes, and that view is obviously very much anchored in the enterprise use case. So it might be different when it comes to consumers, or if you're running, I don't know, a CloudBot machine on your Mac Mini overnight. But I think a lot of it will be transferable, if not all of it.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. You mentioned CloudBot and what's it now, OpenCloud today, but that really I wouldn't say mainstreamed the idea of these agents, but and capabilities, but definitely got a lot of people very excited about what can be done with agents. Now, do you see any fallout from that with your customers, where they're like, I want to do this and that, or has there been any reaction from them yet to this?
Yeah, so I think one of the amazing things we're seeing with AI is the willingness and openness and appetite of the largest companies in the world to like they're all in and innovating and wanting to innovate. That being said, these companies obviously have constraints that me, Matan, as a personal citizen, hacking away on a Mac Mini at night when my toddler is sleeping is very different
Yes.
than a CISO of a Fortune 500.
Absolutely.
I think one of the things that is happening in this industry is A, it's moving really fast, and B, we are feeding off of the X universe happy path.
Yep.
The reality is most of our work, especially at large companies, does not happen on the happy path. And the question goes back to how do we allow you to use this technology in a secure, compliant fashion within these folks?
Yep.
I'll give you an example. Most of the open cloud bots or open cloud or whatever.
They may have changed while we're recording this.
Kind of like Google changing naming every couple of weeks.
Exactly.
Is there's major security concerns.
Yep.
Especially, and I'm not talking about like security, like there are literally people who scan for access ports and so on and so forth to get access to your data and so on and so forth. Out of the box configuration of these bots is actually extremely vulnerable right now for risk. So to me, it is, yes, they made it easier. They took something that already exists and they made it even more accessible and kind of dumped gasoline on it, which is, don't get me wrong, it's effing awesome and I love it and I use it personally. However, before I used it personally, because I'm an anxious, neurotic person, I went to our CISO and like, hey, can you send me your configuration so I don't blow up my personal bank accounts and give them access to my house network? And he sent me this doc around the configuration from a secure perspective and so on and so forth and walked me through it. So this is the part that I think is really, really delicate. I'm all for making this technology significantly more accessible to the masses, but there needs to be an understanding that there's abstracting complexity is great, and we should do that. But there's a reason why there's all these configuration in the background, and a lot of these products, what they do is they actually eliminate them unless you really dig into, into like the nuts and bolts.
Right.
And the nuts and bolts still matter here. Because if you give like an agent free-for-all access, like really bad things can happen if you don't supervise it overnight.
Yep.
and don't put the right guardrails and so on. So this is to me the piece that is a little still concerning.
Mm.
And when we meet with companies, we're very transparent with them around this. We're like, for example, when they came to us, like, when would you have a quote unquote agent? And we're like, we have an agent. I can demo it to you right now behind the feature flag in production. It's there. And like, then why didn't you ship it? And I was like, well, because I don't think it's enterprise grade.
Right.
And
Right.
if I give you access to it, you'll complain to me that it hallucinates 70% of the time.
Yeah, it makes for great demos, right? But getting
Exactly.
that demo into production is a really difficult step. It's like, yeah.
Yeah. So this is, to me, I think that the tightrope that we're walking here at Writer, which is, how do we get this amazing technology in a responsible, secure fashion to our clients? I don't want to hold it. I don't want to hide it. Obviously, we're also not working in a vacuum, but I think this is what it comes down to, when we work with a bank, a hedge fund, a healthcare provider, like, the risks are really high if you get this wrong, for us as well as for them. And I mostly care about the for them here.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah.
One thing we've kind of hinted, or you've hinted at in our conversation, what we haven't quite talked about yet, is that there's also a cultural thing to bringing these agents into these companies and how that changes. You mentioned kind of how it changes the company itself and the workflows and everything, really. How's your thinking there evolved? Because I know you've got this theory of, on the one hand, you've got the graph and the stack, the brain and the body, like the people who actually have to work with these tools as well, and how to help them. How are you thinking about that today?
It's a great question. So I think, I am not in the camp that think AI is going to replace us all and kill us all and live with itself, kind of thing. Um, um, I'm sorry, I don't know why my messages are coming through, but I think, to me, the change is going to be more, in some ways, maybe deeper, and in some ways, maybe shallower. And I'll explain what I mean
Okay.
by that. I think as the cost of deploying agent is going down to zero, like the marginal cost. I think, and I've written quite extensively about this. To me, in a world where agents become better and better, thanks to the models, thanks to the context, thanks to all of these things that we talked about, the cost is no longer on getting the incremental agent. The cost will be what we call supervised, and we intentionally say supervised and not observability. So, because the
Why
analogy
is
I
that?
have in
Because we
mind,
talk a lot about observability lately.
yeah, and observability is great and it's really important. But I think what's missing is, if we continue treating this agent as pure APIs, we're missing a large part of what's happening here. And what I mean by that is, if you're a 10,000 person org and you decide to deploy eventually 50, 100,000, whatever agents, which is not unheard of given your human headcount. It's called your organic agents versus synthetic agents headcount. You're no longer a 10,000 person org. You're a 110,000 person org. And managing 110,000 people is a very different problem than managing 10,000. And I think what we're going to see is, where we're going to see the fractures is going to be around, what does it take to run an organization of that scale? Because all of a sudden, it just changes the way you run your business on a fundamental level. And both from like a people's point of view, or agents or humans or agent, whatever, but also from, as technology comes in, obviously the way to manage organization changes. And that's why we call it supervised, because it's not just tell me the 300, 400, 500 prompts in, prompts out, success, whatever, which is more observability. It tells you what happened. Supervised is more like, why did this happen and should it happen again?
Yeah.
So to me, managing agent is more akin to managing an org, which you have leveling, you promote agents, you promote users. So that's one piece of it. The other piece is, I think, on the human layer, within the organization, we're going to move to a world that everyone is becoming a manager.
Yes.
And you have three types of manager, or three classes. One is manager of people, one is manager of agents, and one is manager of hybrid teams. The reality is, over time, we're going to converge to manager of agents and manager of hybrid teams. And that creates the second change in an organization, which I think is non-trivial because a lot of us have not managed people, let alone agents.
Right.
So that's like a completely new skill set that we need to like gain. The third change is as execution becomes cheaper and cheaper because agents become deploying them cheaper and cheaper, and inference becomes cheaper, and so on and so forth. And the limiting factor becomes supervision,
Right.
meaning being the manager component. What will happen is more orgs are going to move, and this is my interpretation, from functional to objective driven, meaning the concept of, if you look at it in the marketing space, you have like what's called content supply chain. You have very well defined roles today.
Right.
I think what you're gonna like, SMS marketing, email marketing, this, that, copy here. I think what's gonna happen more and more is you're gonna have end-to-end ownership, and it doesn't mean that it's gonna be one person, but you're gonna have much more accountability, and people are gonna care. It's like, I don't care how you do this, just get it done, and they care about like what is the objective here. So almost like much more objective-driven organizations. And there's a lot of implications to all these three things: the hierarchy within the org, how decisions get made, where are the stop gaps, where are the checks and balances, veto rights, and so on and so forth. But I think that is where the bigger question from let's call it industrial organization come into play, versus like, oh, the agent is gonna, like, I don't know, kill me in my sleep kind of thing.
We hope that's not going to happen. But there was a line, I forget which one of your essays it was in, but there's a line in it where you talk about that there's a risk that in some of these organizations, if they don't manage this change right, the human almost becomes a wrapper around AI. And I was wondering if you can expand on that a little bit, and how to avoid that, because I think to some degree that's what people worry about, right? That they're just becoming a user of AI and not much else, and AI almost using them to some degree to just fill in the gaps sometimes. But
yeah, I feel like this is a message we get every time there's like a technology step function or multi-step. We heard this in like the industrial revolution with the looms, where we've obviously heard this to some extent with the cloud. Accountants have said that early in the days when Excel or spreadsheets, not Excel, spreadsheets came about. So and this is, I'm not saying this to minimize the argument. I think at every point in turn we have to address it, and we have to take it seriously. Because on one hand, I don't think the fact that something did not happen in the past doesn't mean it won't happen in the future. But I also think we need to be very mindful, because we're dealing with people's like passion, people's jobs, people's welfare, and on a personal note, like, I started my career while still in undergrad, working for the government, working in actually social security and healthcare policy.
reforming the social security system, which is
Well,
very
reforming, but also learning the hard lesson that if you touch the third rail, you need to do it to some extent in secret, but also bring in people with you. Because, like, on one hand, if you get this right, there's nothing that impacts people more than that, like social benefits. If you get this wrong, you get this really wrong. And we're talking about changing a button on an app and seeing some conversion rates change. Like, great, but like, if you're impacting millions and millions of people and their ability to buy food at the end of the month, that's like a very different scale, as well as the impact, good or bad, that you can do. And my honest belief and learning from spending time in the public sector is no one goes to the public sector meaning to do bad. Now, you might not agree with their opinions, and that's totally okay. But like, you don't go and take a massive pay cut or non-pay at all unless you like truly believe that you can drive for good change. And I think that's what my view is, that the human is not going to go away, it's going to evolve. And this is not a change that's going to happen in like a day. Like, I think when I joined, again, working in the government, I remember booting up my PC for the first time. This is not Silicon Valley, so we used PCs there. And I see Windows loading up, and all of a sudden, after the Windows load up, I see another load up screen, which is like 1, 2, 3 Lotus or something like that. Now, I'm assuming a lot of the people on this stream wouldn't remember or know what Lotus is, but a lot might not remember or know. So when I asked our IT person, I was like, "What the hell is this? I've never seen this before." And he's like, "Listen, man, think of it as the operating system to prevent the older generation from breaking the operating system." And the reality is, and I think this is where we need to be a little humble in the Valley, in tech. You do not stumble into being a Global 2000 or a Fortune 500 company. You don't mistakenly become a global leader. The employees in these companies have so much domain expertise and knowledge that will not go away. And the question here is, how do you leverage that, unlock that domain expertise with this technology? It's not about replacing, it's about supercharging. And I think, maybe when my daughter, who's 2 in 2 weeks, when she goes to the labor market, it will be a completely different experience. But I don't see a world that someone who's been doing, I don't know, credit risk at a bank for the last 30 years would stop doing or using the tools that they're using. So this goes back to like, how do you bring AI to meet them where they do their work, to make them more efficient, more effective, more diligent? My wife's a real estate agent, and I've been playing with AI to help her in her own business, to build tools for her while using the cloud bots and so on and so forth, to learn what's happening in the market. And I think this is similar. Like, at the end of the day, or the same thing I tell my PMs, you need to use AI. But if you share a spec with me, I don't care who wrote it. It's coming under your name. And similarly, I don't care for an engineer if an AI wrote your code, but the PR is under your name. If you don't know what's happening here, and if you generate slope, I'm not blaming the AI. I'm blaming you as the person who pushed this PR through. And I think people conflate the fact that it accelerates you from taking the responsibility and accountability that you have when you present the content that you're presenting. And I think this is like a really important nuance. The same way when I was in school, I could not use spell checker, which is insane today. Like, why would I not be able to use spell checker if you think about kids today? And I think the skill that is missing for all of us, and to some extent managers have it more, but we all need to learn it, is we're all becoming editors. We're all editing content, written or not, generated or not, by these agents. But I am still accountable. If I'm presenting to our board a deck that was created by an agent, it doesn't matter. I'm presenting the deck. If the numbers are wrong, I am accountable. No one's going to fire the agent. They're going to fire Matan.
Yes, for sure.
So the stamp of approval is still on the human.
No, I absolutely agree there. I think a question that I think we're all grappling with is how does that change just the process of getting to that step where you have that deck, the kind of the thinking through building the deck, and when that gets outsourced, when the thinking gets outsourced, I think is that a lot of people worry about that step, right?
No, I agree, but let me ask you this. Do you think the fact that I lead product, all the good ideas come from me? No. Actually, I would argue most good ideas don't come from me. They come from my PMs, from engineers, from the sales team, from our CEO, from our founders, from our CTO. And then there's like, so to me, having this agent is another layer in that brainstorming. And this is why judgment becomes such a critical component, and why we originally called it judgment graph and not context graph, but we're aligning with the industry terminology, because I actually think judgment is not going anywhere, and it becomes even more critical. because you need to learn how to sift through the noise to some extent, like which you do already today with judgment. You need to know how to define the right KPIs, the right goals, to hold people or agents accountable. You need to make a decision when a feature or an experiment or anything makes sense to go to production versus not. So actually, the human component here becomes more and more critical. And I don't see anytime soon that that judgment will go away, especially not in the enterprise space. Like we've had algo trading, for example, in the hedge fund world for many, many years, but there's still a component of judgment and reviewing to see the trades, to see the positions. There's still guardrails if things go off the deep end. We've had cases in the stock market that the machines, for whatever reasons, decided to oversell and over leverage, whatever. Like it's not going anywhere. It just becomes, I think, a lot of it becomes more domain specific. And I think what organizations would need to do, and this is something I talked a lot about when I talk about the judgment graph, is to be very transparent where judgment is concentrated, and who has the rights or in what context to make that judgment call, and how do we hold them accountable and track judgment over time to see that. And to me, that becomes like a much more critical component. By the way, it already exists in the organization. It's just that it's implicit versus explicit.
Yeah. So how do you deal with that when it's the agent that makes the judgment? Because there will be cases where it maybe makes sense for the agent to make the judgment, right? Just like, we think about self-driving cars and, who's at risk or who's guilty when something happens, when the self-driving car crashes, for example, right?
For sure. But again, I think there's a lot of context here, and it's the case by case. But to me, and I'm sure, I mean, all of us to some extent know people. I actually think the self-driving car is a great example. And this is also an example I tackled when I was working in policy. To me, there's three different conversations here. The conversations of how many people get injured or die in car accidents today. And I think this is something that people, and I don't mean it to say, oh, less people die with autonomous cars. Like, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the idea that technology could save the hundreds of thousands, if not probably millions around the world that are dying unnecessarily. And this is not part of this conversation. It's absolutely mind-boggling to me. Now, there's the second component here, which is, and this is something we spent a lot of time thinking about, is there is implication for self-driving anything, to be clear, on the labor market. If you look at the US, for example, one of the largest employers, as well as one of the most powerful unions in the nation, is the Teamsters. Historically, what we thought would be the simplest self-driving would be self-driving, like, quote unquote, trucks across highways, because it's a highway, it doesn't have the complexity of cities, blah 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 blah. So I can tell you that when I was in policy, one of the things we were talking about is this idea that as we roll out this technology, it would be rolled out first and foremost in trucks, for example, with probably an accompanying driver, but also when you want to enter urban areas, that's when you have the equivalent that you have in seaports of a navigator, because of the risk in the urban areas. And that's how we were thinking about it. And yes, there needs to be a social policy component on the transition, because like Teamsters, like we have, I don't know the exact number now, but hundreds of thousands, if not more, of people that's what they do for a living, and they're the arteries of our economy. And I think where I do think there is a gap today on a policy level, and no one is dealing with it yet head on, is thinking about how do we give people tools to think so they are capable to navigate this new economy, whether it's through retraining or on-job training, or like on a national level. And I think that, to me, is the more pressing question, because I think as AI gets better you don't need to be specialized. Like prompt engineering is a hoax. Like it's not going to exist because AI becomes better and better and understanding you better and better. But learning how to interact with it, learning how to manage agent, learning how to build evals for your domain, I think these are the skills that both companies, as well as to some extent, I know in America we don't like saying like the government, but to some extent the government, whether it's state, local, federal, need to do initiatives, because if you don't do that, we are not preparing our workforce for where we're heading, and the writing is on the wall.
Right.
So we have now an opportunity to prepare them, and there's an opportunity, you know, as the boomer generation is retiring, and there's a, not to say that they're not tech savvy, but there is a tech savvy generation already in market. And obviously, as we think about the generations that are now in school and growing up as AI native, what does that mean? I think this is where there needs to be a rethinking of how we do things. To me, you know, my wife loves writing. She's a great writer. We've had this argument many times about AI as a tool and how it, you know, eliminates the need for writing. And I was like, no, it's not. To me, it introduces actually a equally important, if not to some extent more important skill, which is being an editor, fact checking. One of the things we're seeing right now, and we've seen since, you know, in the last 10 or 15 years, is this idea of like fake news, false information. And I think AI is a forcing function for us to have critical thinking, actually. To make sure that what the machine is saying is not nonsense. So you have to have much more critical thinking than you would maybe prior to that.
I agree, absolutely. It's our politicians are not always proactive when it comes to these things, right? That is part of it, I think. But I think that's a really important discussion to have. And I wish we had more time. We're coming up on our almost an hour here already, and I know you've got a busy schedule as well. So really appreciate you being here and for the thoughtful discussion, because I think there's a lot here to unpack still. So we may just pick this up at some point in the future again as we see where the fallout ends up being from all of this. And there's a lot going on that I think I find myself regularly thinking that people are not prepared for what's coming at them, and people don't know what's coming at them, right? So it'll be interesting to keep watching for sure. So really appreciate you being here, and we'll pick the discussion up at some point in the future.
Thank you so much for a great conversation, Frederic. I really appreciate the time.
Same here. Thank you so much.